They told us Africa was free. They lied. On a quiet flight from Paris, freedom was once again held at gunpoint. 4 men stood, weapons raised, and in a single breath the cabin became a prison in the sky. 182 passengers, silenced by fear, children sobbing, mothers begging, old men gripping their rosaries. The hijackers shouted their demands. Money, prisoners, leverage over France. To them, it was politics. To the passengers, it was survival. But in seat 178 sat a secret more dangerous than any gun. A man in a cap, sunglasses, hiding sharp eyes. Tall strangers. He looked like no one. In truth, he was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the soldier president who had defied Paris itself. If the hijackers knew who they held, their demands would not be 10 million. They would ask for Africa's future. They would ask for blood. So the question became deadly simple. How long could a leader hide among his people before history forced him to stand? If this story shook you, don't just scroll away. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think leaders like Traoré can stay hidden? Or will history always drag them into the light? For decades, Burkina Faso had been dismissed as a landlocked speck on the map. Poor, dependent, forgotten. To the west, it was nothing but a pawn in their endless game of influence. Soldiers came and went, aid flowed and dried, but beneath the surface, anger was rising like heat off the desert. That anger had a name, Ibrahim Traoré, a young captain who refused to kneel before Paris, who dared to say no, when everyone else whispered, yes. To some, he was a rebel. To others, he was a savior. To France, he was a problem that would not go away. And yet here he was, sitting quietly in the back of an Air France jet, returning from secret talks in Paris. No guards, no motorcade, just a cap, a pair of dark glasses, and a desire to travel as an ordinary son of Africa. Perhaps he believed anonymity was safer than protocol. Perhaps he wanted to feel, if only for a few hours, what it meant to be just another passenger. But fate does not allow leaders to stay hidden for long. The hijackers had chosen this plane at random, or so it seemed. 4 men, their accents betraying the mix of Arab and French worlds, stood tall in the aisles. They shouted about justice, about brothers locked away in French prisons, about blood debts unpaid. To many on board, their words were confusing noise. To Ibrahim, they were echoes of a larger war, the same war he himself was fighting. Though by different means, he looked around the cabin. An old Burkina woman trembling beside him, clutching her shawl. A mother trying to soothe 2 crying children. French businessmen muttering nervously in rapid whispers. Tourists wide-eyed, caught between disbelief and terror. In that moment, Ibrahim understood something brutal. This was not just a hijacking. It was a mirror of Africa itself, trapped, threatened, bargaining for survival, while outsiders dictated the rules. And so the larger question began to take shape, sharp and dangerous. When does a struggle for freedom become indistinguishable from an act of terror? When does silence become betrayal? And when the lives of 182 souls hang in the balance, what price should a leader pay to protect them? These were not questions for books or conferences. They were questions for now, for the next breath, the next decision, the next word that could either save or destroy. As the engines roared and the aircraft circled over foreign skies, Ibrahim kept his head low. But inside, he was preparing, not for escape, not for negotiation, for something far greater, a test of leadership that would decide not only the fate of those on board, but the dignity of a continent still bleeding from centuries of betrayal. This was no longer just about a plane. This was about Africa's soul, locked in a cabin at 30,000 feet. So stay with us, because what happened next will change how you see power, fear, and the meaning of courage. The cabin had been quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that makes people trust the sky. Flight AF 726 had lifted from Paris hours ago, its engines humming a lullaby of distance and routine. Passengers stretched their legs, sipped wine, whispered about business deals, holidays, or the families waiting in Ouagadougou. A fragile peace floated above the clouds. In seat 178 by the window sat a man who seemed to belong to no one. His shirt was plain, his jeans worn, his shoes sporty but unremarkable. A baseball cap shadowed his face, and sunglasses hid the sharpness of his gaze. To anyone looking, he was just another African traveler. Invisible, forgettable. But invisibility was exactly his armor, for he was Captain Ibrahim Traoré, soldier president of Burkina Faso, a man whose name carried both fear and hope. He had chosen to fly without escort, without ceremony, no motorcade on the runway, no security detail, clogging the aisles. Just a quiet return home after secret talks in Paris, talks he had no intention of announcing. To travel like this was risky, but official flights announced in advance were even riskier. In disguise, he could vanish into the crowd. Or so he thought. The first sign of change came not from the cockpit, but from the cabin itself. A flight attendant, balancing a tray of steaming drinks, gasped when she saw 4 men rise at once. At first, she mistook it for impatience, travelers stretching after long hours. Then came the glint, a gun pulled from under a jacket, metal flashing in the artificial light. The tray clattered to the floor, hot tea splashing across the aisle. The cabin froze. Nobody moved. The shout tore through the air. Arabic twisted with a French accent. Passengers stiffened, breaths held hostage before the guns even pointed. This plane is under our control. Follow instructions, and no one will get hurt. Fear spread like fire. Mothers clutched their children. Tourists shrank into their seats. A man crossed himself, lips moving in silent prayer. The cabin became a cage. Ibrahim stayed still. Years of military training had taught him the danger of sudden movements. The first seconds of a hijacking were always the most lethal chaos mistaken for resistance. Panic, mistaken for defiance. 2 of the hijackers pushed forward, forcing their way into the cockpit. The other 2 remained in the aisles, weapons raised, eyes darting, trying to project authority while hiding their own fear. At the back, one of them barked in broken French. Phones, tablets, all devices. Hand them over now. Passengers fumbled nervously. Some clutched their phones as if they were lifelines. Others obeyed at once. Ibrahim slipped his own device quietly into the side pocket of his seat, unnoticed. He understood. These men had control, but not order. Their chaos was real, and that could be turned against them. Beside him, the old Burkina woman trembled. Her hands shook so badly that her rosary beads clicked together like bones. Tears pooled in her eyes. Ibrahim leaned slightly, his voice low, steady. Do not fear. Mother, everything will be all right. She turned her face to him, lines of age, etched with sorrow. You are Burkina, aren't you? My son. Yes. Mother, he whispered, and we will all return home. His words were soft, but his tone was steel. She clung to them as if they were a shield. Meanwhile, at the front, the self-declared leader of the hijackers returned from the cockpit. He raised his gun and his voice. Listen, our demands are simple. $10 million, and the release of 3 prisoners from Lante prison in France. If our demands are met, you will live. If not, he paused, letting silence do the killing. You will never see your homes again. Gasps rippled across the rows. A woman stifled a scream. Somewhere, a child began to wail. The men at the back tightened their grips on their weapons. Ibrahim studied the speaker. Young, tense, shoulders rigid but eyes unsteady. Not a professional. Not a man who had lived a life of violence. He carried ideology, not training. A fire that burned without discipline. Dangerous. Yes, but also vulnerable. The plane shifted course. The engines groaned as the pilot obeyed orders from the armed men. Through the window, the vast darkness of Mali stretched below. The journey home had been hijacked into a theater of fear. Ibrahim's mind sharpened. Each second was a calculation. Each glance, a reading of human weakness. He knew the passengers were watching too, seeking any sign of hope. For now, he gave them none. Sometimes, survival demanded silence. But inside, a question burned louder than the engines. How long could he stay hidden? Because if the hijackers ever discovered the truth that the man in seat 178 was not just another traveler, but the president of Burkina Faso, then the value of their demands would rise beyond money. They would demand history itself, and history was rarely merciful. The cabin smelled of fear. It clung to the recycled air like smoke. Passengers whispered prayers, fingers trembling on seatbelts, eyes locked on the men with guns. Yet, in seat 178, a silence of another kind lived inside Ibrahim Traoré. Not the silence of terror, but the silence of memory. He had been here before, though not on a plane. In training fields where dust filled the lungs and orders cracked like whips, he had learned to keep still while chaos raged around him. He was a soldier before he was a president, and soldiers are taught to breathe when others choke, to listen when others scream. He remembered the first time he fired a rifle. He was barely more than a boy, the stock heavy against his shoulder, the recoil shocking through his bones. Burkina Faso was his classroom, but its lessons were harsher than any textbook. Hunger, drought, the humiliation of foreign soldiers marching across African soil. These shaped him before the army ever did. By the time he wore a uniform, his mind was already carved by struggle. The hijacker's voice pulled him back. Do not resist. Phones. Now, the man's French was jagged, his authority forced. Ibrahim watched as passengers obeyed, some with shaking hands. He thought of his first commander, a man who told him, control is never in the weapon. Control is in the eyes. If your enemy looks away, you already hold him. On the plane, Ibrahim studied the hijacker's gaze. The man could not hold it. His eyes twitched, scanning the rows, searching for fear as proof of power. That weakness was louder than his gun. Ibrahim shifted slightly, enough to ease his cramped legs, but not enough to draw notice. The old woman beside him clutched his arm. My son, are we going to die? Her voice broke like dry wood. No, mother, he said gently. This is not the first storm I have seen. Storm. That word carried him back to the army camps, where rain turned soil into rivers and men into machines. Nights under canvas. Nights without sleep. Nights when his comrades whispered about corruption, about leaders who dined in palaces while soldiers starved in trenches. He had seen men break. Men stronger, older, richer, in experience. Some collapsed under exhaustion, others under despair. But Ibrahim learned early that the true battlefield was not in the dust or the mud, it was in the mind. Hold the mind, his commander said, and the body will follow. The hijackers barked again. This time, their leader spoke of demands, shouting names of prisoners. Malik, Riyad, Omar. Ibrahim knew the names, not from newspapers, but from the whispers of West African barracks. Men accused of striking at French military outposts. To Paris, they were criminals. To many Africans, they were martyrs. The irony struck him with bitter force. Here, in this cabin, young men with guns shouted against colonialism, using violence to fight the very empire he himself opposed. Différentes uniformes, different methods. Same, anger. Yet the old woman trembling beside him reminded him why his path was different. Violence swallowed the weak first, and leaders, true leaders, were not allowed that luxury. He closed his eyes for a moment. Memory bled into the present. He saw his father's hands cracked from work, heavy with calluses pushing him toward books when there was no money for bread. Learn, his father said, because they cannot steal knowledge. Those words were why he became a soldier who studied, a fighter who questioned. The plane shuddered as it turned sharply, engines groaning. Gasps rippled through the cabin. Children cried out. Mothers shushed them in trembling voices. Ibrahim steadied his breath, recalling another lesson. A soldier who panics teaches panic. A soldier who breathes teaches courage. So he leaned once more toward the woman beside him. Look at me. Mother, he whispered. Her eyes, wet with tears, lifted to his. Do I look afraid? She shook her head. Then you must not be afraid either. Her hand tightened around his back. For a brief moment, a flicker of calm moved through her body. That flicker spread. A child across the aisle stared at Ibrahim's calm face and quieted his sobs. A businessman whispered to his colleague. He looks like he knows something, and perhaps that was enough. Because Ibrahim understood. In war, in crisis, in the sky, 30,000 feet above Mali, leadership was not about shouting orders. It was about holding steady when the world tilted. But a soldier's past can only shield for so long. Already the hijackers were arguing, their voices sharp, their plan fraying at the edges. One of them grabbed a passenger, dragging him forward toward the cockpit. The negotiations are not being taken seriously. The man shouted, "Maybe if they see a hostage bleed, they will listen." The passenger screamed. Panic surged. Ibrahim's pulse quickened. The time for silence was ending. And deep inside, the soldier within him asked the question the president could not avoid. Would he reveal who he truly was, or let an innocent man die in his place? The plane had become a theater of fear. Every cough, every whisper, every rustle of fabric was a risk. The hijackers ruled the aisles like predators marking territory, but their movements betrayed something more fragile than authority. Uncertainty. The leader called himself Youssef. He was tall, lean, his beard trimmed but uneven. His eyes darted as he spoke, scanning the cabin, never resting too long on one face. His gun trembled slightly when he raised it, though he tried to mask it with volume. He shouted commands in French, then switched to Arabic when speaking to his companions. His voice cracked more than once. A crack Ibrahim noticed, but others mistook for rage. Beside him was Hakim, broader in the shoulders, his grip on the weapon tighter, more natural. His stare was heavy, the kind that made passengers lower their eyes instantly. Yet even he betrayed inexperience. He checked the safety of his rifle too often, as though afraid it might betray him. The younger two, Jamal and Ahmed, looked barely older than students. Their movements were erratic, their eyes wide with adrenaline. One of them flinched when a child cried out. Another kicked a fallen bag across the aisle, as if to remind himself that he was dangerous. Ibrahim watched them all carefully. Years of soldiering had taught him this. Weapons reveal little, but hands and eyes reveal everything. These were not men of discipline. They were men of desperation. Their guns gave them power, but their nerves would decide how long that power lasted. Around him, passengers shifted in their seats like cattle, sensing slaughter. The old Burkina woman beside him whispered prayers under her breath, words spilling so fast they blurred into a murmur. Across the aisle, two French businessmen argued in hushed tones about ransom, about governments, about their own survival. Behind them, a mother clutched her children, pressing their faces into her lap to shield them from the sight of the guns. Ibrahim let his gaze move slowly, not just to the hijackers, but to the passengers. Fear was everywhere. Yes, but also something else. Expectation. They looked not at Youssef, but at one another, searching for a sign, a leader, a thread of courage to follow. He could feel their eyes settling, little by little, on him, not because they recognized him his disguise still held, but because he was the only one not trembling. Calm draws attention, the way light draws moths, and Ibrahim knew it was dangerous to be noticed. The hijackers barked another order. Keep your heads down, no talking. Their French was sharp, strained, forced into anger. They patrolled up and down, pointing their weapons at faces, at hands, at nothing in particular. It was theater loud, chaotic theater meant to hide their own fear. Ibrahim whispered once more to the woman beside him. Breathe. Mother, fear feeds them. Do not give it to them. She looked at him, eyes wet, but steadying. You are different. My son, you speak like one who has seen death before. He said nothing. Sometimes silence is the truest confession. But even as he tried to blend into the crowd, Ibrahim knew the danger was growing. The hijackers' plan was fragile, their patience thinner than glass. Fear makes men reckless, and recklessness in the air is death for everyone. Then it happened. One of the hijackers, Ahmed, barely more than a boy with a gun too heavy for his arms, snapped, his face twisted with frustration. He lunged forward, grabbing a passenger, a middle-aged Frenchman in a suit. Sweating through his collar, Ahmed yanked him up from his seat, dragging him toward the cockpit. The negotiations are not being taken seriously, he shouted, voice cracking with both rage and panic. Maybe, if we send a hostage, they will listen. The cabin erupted. People screamed. The Frenchman struggled, crying out for help, his briefcase tumbling to the floor. Children wailed louder, their mothers begging the hijackers to stop. The aisle was chaos, guns waving, hands trembling. fear exploding into noisy. Ibrahim's body tensed. His soldier's instinct screamed to act. His leader's mind warned him to wait. But both knew the same truth. Silence could not last forever. And in that moment, as Ahmed dragged the hostage past row 178, Ibrahim felt history pulling at his disguise, tearing away the illusion of anonymity. Because if he remained seated, a man would die. But if he stood, the secret of seat 178 might be lost forever. Ahmed dragged the sweating Frenchman down the aisle, his gun shaking as much as his hands. The man stumbled, begged, cried out in his mother tongue. Passengers shrank back in horror, pressing against their seats as if fabric could shield them from bullets. The hijacker's face twisted between rage and fear, a boy's expression forced into the mask of a killer. Youssef, the leader, snapped at him. Enough. Ahmed, put him down. His French was clipped, his accent heavy. Ahmed ignored him, shoving the hostage toward the cockpit door. They must take us seriously. Ahmed screamed. A hostage will show them we are not weak. The cabin fell into an awful silence. Mothers pressed hands over their children's mouths. The old woman beside Ibrahim whispered again, but her prayer broke into sobs. Ibrahim's mind tightened like a fist. This was the moment he had dreaded. If blood was spilled, the situation would collapse into chaos. Then, before the decision could harden into violence, Ibrahim spoke. His voice cut through the silence, not loud, not disparity, but firm. Stop. The word froze Ahmed mid-step. Every head turned towards seat 178. The hijacker's eyes flared, gun raised, searching for the source of defiance. You know, negotiations take time. Ibrahim continued. Calm, unflinching. Sudden decisions will ruin everything. Violence now will not help you. It will only close doors. The hijacker stared at him, chest heaving. Who are you to tell me this? Who are you? I am just a passenger, Ibrahim said evenly. But I know how negotiations work. I know rash actions kill both demands and men. Youssef moved forward, curious now, his gun still pointed. But his voice softened. You speak like someone with knowledge. Why so calm? Are you a government man? Ibrahim met his eyes. I have worked in diplomacy. A half-truth. Sharp enough to convince. I understand how agreements are made. If you want, I can help you. Violence will only hurt your cause. The cabin held its breath. The passengers stared in disbelief. Who was this man who dared to speak, to reason with armed hijackers? Even Ahmed faltered, his grip on the hostage loosening. Youssef whispered to his men in Arabic, too low for most to hear. But Ibrahim caught fragments. Suspicion, hesitation, calculation. Finally, Youssef nodded. Very well. Diplomat, let us see your skill. Come with us to the cockpit. The passengers gasped. As Ibrahim rose, the old woman clutched his sleeve. God protect you, my son. He gave her hand a brief squeeze, then walked slowly forward. Every step was a gamble, every eye on him. Yet his posture was calm, shoulders straight, head unbowed. Inside the cockpit, the pilot and co-pilot looked exhausted, their faces pale with strain. One hijacker guarded them, weapon close. The radio crackled with the distant voice of a French negotiator. Who is this? The negotiator asked sharply when Ibrahim entered. A diplomat. Youssef replied with a mocking smile. He will help us. Suspicion coated the French voice. Is this a trick? Another hostage. Ibrahim leaned toward the microphone, his tone steady. I am just a passenger. I want this resolved peacefully. I want everyone home alive. The negotiator paused. Then perhaps you can reason with them. They demand 10 million euros and the release of 3 men from Lante prison. The names struck Ibrahim like a spark. Malik Al-Tsim, Riyad Hamoudi, Omar Benani. Symbols. To France, they were terrorists, accused of attacking military facilities. To many in Africa, they were freedom fighters, men who had stood against the lingering shadow of colonial power. Their imprisonment in Lante was a wound that never healed, a reminder that France's reach still stretched deep into West African soil. Ibrahim chose his words carefully. You want your brothers released. But tell me, what will you gain if blood is shed here? Do you think France will release them if you kill innocent people? Youssef bristled. They are not innocent. They are blind. They fly in comfort, while our brothers rot in cells. They are passengers. Ibrahim countered. And if you harm them, your cause will be stained. You will look like murderers, not freedom fighters. Silence fell heavy in the cockpit. The pilot's eyes flicked toward Ibrahim. Confusion mingled with recognition. Who was this man who spoke with such authority, such measured force? Finally, Youssef exhaled, lowering his gun slightly. We are not terrorists. We fight against colonialists who suck Africa's blood. Ibrahim held his gaze. Then prove it. Show the world you are more than violence. For a moment, the leader seemed caught between pride and doubt. His men watched him, waiting for a sign. The cockpit pulsed with tension, and Ibrahim, reading their faces, their eyes, their trembling hands, knew the truth. These were not hardened killers. They were young men, inflamed by ideology, desperate to be heard, willing to gamble with lives, but not yet hardened enough to spill blood casually. That weakness could be his opening. But weakness, when cornered, could also explode. The cockpit was heavy with the sound of engines and strained breaths. The French negotiator's voice faded for a moment, leaving only static. In that brief silence, Ibrahim leaned closer to Youssef, his tone calm, deliberate. Tell me about your brothers, he said. Who are these men you want freed? Youssef's eyes hardened, but there was pride in his voice. Malik al-Sim, Riyad Hamoudi, Omar Benani. They are not criminals. They are soldiers of justice. France calls them terrorists, but Africa calls them sons. The names hung in the air like sparks. Ibrahim knew them well. Malik once, a university student in Bamako, turned fighter after French troops raided his village. Riyad, a schoolteacher who abandoned chalk for rifle when his cousin was killed in a drone strike. Omar, the quiet one, accused of planning attacks that set fire to French convoys. To Paris. They were dangerous men, locked safely away in Lante prison, the cold stone fortress in the heart of France. To the youth of Mali and Niger, their faces appeared on posters, whispered in chants at night, painted on walls as symbols of resistance. Ibrahim closed his eyes for a second, memory spilling forward. He saw dusty streets of Ouagadougou filled with protesters shouting against colonial presence, against foreign flags raised over African soil. He had walked those streets himself, a soldier still, young, but old enough to feel the weight of betrayal. The hijackers' words dragged him back. They are martyrs, Youssef continued, his voice trembling with fervor. They fought the empire that has bled us for centuries. While our brothers rot, the French eat from our land. Do you not see the injustice? Ibrahim studied him. I see it, he said softly. I have seen villages starved while gold was shipped abroad. I have seen soldiers wearing uniforms stitched in Paris. I understand your anger. For a moment, Youssef's eyes lit with recognition, almost relief. He leaned closer. Then you are not against us. Ibrahim let the words hang. He could not admit. He could not deny. He was walking a tightrope strung above fire. The younger hijackers shifted, restless. Jamal muttered in Arabic. Maybe he is one of us. Ahmed nodded, his grip on the rifle loosening slightly. In their eyes, Ibrahim was no longer just a stranger. He was a possible ally, a voice that spoke their pain with clarity. They themselves lacked, and that, Ibrahim realized, was both his weapon and his danger. If they believed him, one of them, he might bend their decisions. But if they discovered his true identity, the betrayal would shatter them into violence. The French negotiator returned on the radio, his tone sharp. Youssef, listen to me. Paris cannot release these prisoners. It is impossible. Youssef's jaw tightened. His knuckles whitened on the grip of his weapon. Impossible. France made it impossible for us to live free. France made it impossible for us to eat our own bread. He spat the words, anger flooding his face. The cockpit trembled with tension. Ibrahim stepped in before fury could ignite. Listen to me, Youssef. What you want is not only the freedom of 3 men. What you want is recognition. A voice to be seen. Youssef's eyes met his. A storm of rage and hope. Yes, exactly. And killing passengers will silence that voice forever. Ibrahim pressed. You will become what France already calls you, terrorists. Do you want that? The question cut deep. Even Hijacking, the broad-shouldered one, shifted uneasily. None of them wanted the label. They wanted banners, chants, a cause that lived beyond their own lives. Terrorists die in shadows. Martyrs live in stories. Ibrahim knew this well. He thought of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary whose portrait still hung in hidden corners of Burkina Faso, a man who had tried to carve dignity from oppression, only to be struck down by betrayal. Sankara had died young, but his voice still burned. And now, on this plane, 4 young men were trying to etch their own legend by holding 182 souls hostage in the sky. Ibrahim felt the contradiction tighten around him like a noose. He agreed with their rage, with their hatred of foreign domination, but their methods, guns pointed at children, threats against the innocent. This was not liberation. This was desperation dressed as revolution. He breathed slowly, steadying his tone. There are many ways to fight. Yusuf, some make you martyrs, others make you monsters. The world is watching. Which will you choose? Yusuf did not answer immediately. His face wavered, torn between defiance and doubt. Jamal whispered something in Arabic, fear disguised as loyalty. Ahmed muttered about blood. The group was splintering. Their unity, a fragile shell. And Ibrahim, standing in the heart of their storm, felt a darker question rise inside him. One he dared not speak aloud. If we share the same enemy, then what truly separates me from them? The cockpit smelled of sweat and metal, the stale odor of men who carried fear on their skin. Ibrahim stood still, his eyes moving from one hijacker to the next. Their rifles trembled, their words stumbled, but their anger was real. Anger against France, against the past, against the chains that still clung to African soil, and in their fury, Ibrahim saw a reflection of history itself. He thought of the years after Burkina Faso's flag was first raised in independence. Flags changed, yes, but the chains did not break. France still owned the currency, the banks, the contracts. Gold and cotton left African soil in French ships, while children in Ouagadougou went hungry. Even the language of the courts, the schools, the government carried the shadow of Paris. And when voices rose against it, when young men like Sankara dared to say no more, the empire struck back, sometimes with bullets, sometimes with silence, always with control. Ibrahim's jaw tightened. He remembered his own childhood, textbooks praising foreign presidents more than African heroes, teachers warning students never to speak too loudly against France. He remembered military training, French officers walking the camps like masters, giving orders in a land that was not theirs. Now, above the deserts of Mali, 4 desperate men shouted the same truth. Africa was still not free. But their method, guns, hostages, threats, was not freedom. It was another cage. You think France will listen to violence? Ibrahim asked quietly, eyes fixed on Yusuf. They want you to choose this path, because once you spill innocent blood, they win. They point to you and say, see, Africans cannot govern themselves. They are nothing but chaos. Yu's face twisted. So what then? More speeches, more lies in the United Nations, while our brothers rot in cells. Ibrahim felt the weight of his words. He could not tell them the full truth that he himself was the president of a nation already defying Paris, that he too had cut ties, expelled French troops, dared to walk a different path. To reveal it now would ignite the fire too soon. Instead, he answered, as a soldier, the enemy wants us divided. They want us to fight in the dark. Real power is not in a gun. Real power is in unity. Behind him, the radio crackled again. The French negotiator, calm but cold, repeated, France cannot release the prisoners. Stop wasting time. The words dripped with arrogance. The same arrogance that had silenced African voices for generations. Ahmed slammed his fist against the cockpit wall. You see, they mock us. Always. They think we are dogs. His eyes burned, young and reckless. Jamal muttered prayers, torn between faith and fury. Ibrahim kept his voice steady. You are right about one thing. Ahmed, they do not respect us. They never did. But the question is, how do we make them listen? With blood or with something stronger? Hakim frowned. Stronger than a rifle. Yes, Ibrahim said. Stronger than fear. Stronger than death. He left it there. Let the words linger. Let them ask themselves what he meant. Sometimes leadership was not about giving answers, but about planting questions that grew like thorns. He thought again of Sankara, who had once declared, "We must dare to invent the future." Sankara had died, and he had paid with his life. But even in death, he had planted seeds that men like Ibrahim now watered. The plane shifted course. Engines groaning under the weight of indecision. Passengers sobbed quietly in the cabin. A child whimpered, then fell silent at a mother's desperate hush. The atmosphere was a mirror of the continent itself, fragile, trapped, circling in the air. While foreign powers decided its fate, Ibrahim clenched his fists behind his back. He could not let the hijackers see his rage. He needed calm, calculation, control. But inside, his blood boiled. These young men were right about the sickness, but blind about the cure. And blind men with rifles were the most dangerous kind. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself once more. The soldier in him whispered discipline. The leader in him whispered patience. But the African in him roared for justice. And above her, right now, history was strapped into this plane. But on this plane, history was no longer theory. It was life or death. The hours bled into one another. The plane no longer moved forward. It circled, loop after loop, above the barren stretches of Mali. From the windows, passengers could see nothing but endless sand, streaked with fading rivers and broken villages far below. The engines hummed louder now, not with promise, but with threat, the sound of fuel being swallowed faster than time. Every dip in altitude sent a ripple of panic through the cabin. A child screamed. A mother pressed her hand over her daughter's mouth to muffle the sound. Prayers filled the air. A chorus of desperation. Arabic, French, More, English, words from different tongues, but all asking for the same impossible thing: survival. The hijackers prowled the aisles like restless shadows. Their anger had dulled into something harsher. Unease. They barked fewer orders now, their eyes darting to the windows, to the cockpit door, to the fuel gauges they could not read. Even they knew time was running out. Ibrahim sat in silence, hands clasped loosely, head bowed, but his eyes never stopped moving. He watched every tremor in their hands, every twitch in their jaws. He noted how Ahmed, the youngest, flinched whenever the plane jolted, how Jamal whispered to himself, sweat soaking his collar, how Youssef's voice had begun to drop. Less thunder, more uncertainty. And in the faces of the passengers, Ibrahim saw a different kind of collapse. The French businessman 3 rows ahead had stopped whispering to his colleague. He simply stared forward, lips parlent, muttering, "C'est fini. It's over." A woman clutched her crucifix so tightly, her knuckles bled. An elderly Burkina man bent his head against the window, whispering to ancestors. No one else could hear. Fear was not loud anymore. Fear had become quiet, heavy, suffocating. The old woman beside Ibrahim trembled again, reaching for him. "My son," she whispered, voice raw. "Are we going to die in the sky?" He looked at her. His face was calm, but inside, the storm raged. "No, mother," he said. "Not today." She closed her eyes, gripping his hand. For her, his words were oxygen. But Ibrahim knew oxygen would not last if fuel ran out. The cockpit door opened suddenly. Youssef appeared, sweat dripping down his temples. He gestured toward Ibrahim. "You, come." Gasps erupted around the cabin. All eyes followed him as he rose from seat 178. Passengers whispered, wondering who he was, why the hijackers wanted him. Some saw him as doomed. Another hostage about to vanish. Others felt a spark, that maybe this calm stranger held a thread of hope. The old woman caught his sleeve. "God protect you," she whispered again. He squeezed her hand once more, then stepped into the aisle. His strides were measured, deliberate. The hijackers' rifles followed him, but he did not flinch. He walked as if he had walked this path before, because in truth, he had. Not in plains, but in battlefields, in council chambers, in the corridors of power, where a wrong step could end a life or end a nation. Inside the cockpit, the atmosphere was sharper, thinner. The pilot and co-pilot sat rigid, sweat plastering their shirts to their backs. One hijacker hovered over them, finger brushing the trigger, eyes darting between gauges and the sky. The radio crackled with the French negotiator's voice. "Youssef, listen. If you want fuel, you must land in Bamako. There are procedures." Procedures. Youssef spat, glaring at the microphone. "They are stalling. They hope we run dry." Ibrahim's gaze flicked to the gauges. He read the truth in silence. The fuel would not last forever. Decisions had to be made. Dangerous ones. The Frenchman's voice droned on, calm, but patronizing. "Land in Bamako. Release some hostages, and then perhaps your demands can be heard." The younger hijackers muttered angrily. Ahmed slammed his hand against the wall. Jamal cursed under his breath. Youssef gritted his teeth, torn between rage and fear. Ibrahim stood tall, his presence quiet but undeniable. The moment weighed on him. He could remain silent, a shadow among passengers, or he could step forward, risk everything, and attempt to steer the storm. He felt the old lessons echo within him. A soldier does not wait for orders in chaos. He becomes the order. The passengers' cries rang in his memory. The trembling hand of the woman beside him, the whispered despair of the businessman, the sobs of children, and he knew silence would no longer save them. And that was when he made the choice to stand and to speak. The cockpit was a box of nerves. The air smelled of sweat, metal, and fear. Outside, the engines roared as the plane circled yet again, burning precious fuel. Inside, 4 men with rifles clung to their illusion of control, and one calm figure seat. 178 stepped into their storm. Ibrahim's presence filled the cramped space, not with noise, but with silence. He moved slowly, his steps measured, his shoulders squared. The soldiers at the controls glanced at him, desperate for help, yet too afraid to hope. Youssef pointed his gun, jaw clenched. "You, speak. Show me what you claim to know." Ibrahim's eyes locked on his, steady, unflinching. Negotiation is not a game of shouting. Youssef, it is a game of patience, of calculation. Like chess. "Do you play?" The question caught him off guard. "Chess? What has that to do with this?" "Everything," Ibrahim said calmly. "The first rule, the one who moves too quickly, loses. Right now, you are rushing, showing your pieces, exposing your weakness. France is waiting for you to make a reckless move. The moment you do, they strike, and this plane becomes your grave." Youssef blinked, unsettled. His men shifted uneasily. Even the one guarding the pilots glanced at Ibrahim, as if testing his words for truth. The negotiator's voice crackled over the radio. "Youssef, listen. Land in Bamako. We will provide fuel. If you refuse, there will be consequences." Ibrahim leaned slightly toward the radio. "And if he lands in Bamako," he said evenly, "French special forces will surround this plane in minutes. Blood will flow. Not just yours, Youssef. The passengers, too. Is that what you want?" The silence was sharp. Youssef's nostrils flared, his hand tightening on the gun. "They will not dare. They will." Ibrahim countered. "It is their script. They have played it many times before. Hostage takers land. Soldiers storm. Death follows. France saves face. Africa buries its sons." The words landed like stones. Jamal swallowed hard. Ahmed muttered something about betrayal. Even Hakim's eyes darted toward Youssef, questioning. Ibrahim pressed the advantage. "The second rule of chess: never show your king too early. You have revealed all your demands. 10 million euros. 3 prisoners. That is not strategy. That is desperation. France knows exactly what you want. Now they are only waiting for you to collapse." Youssef's face twitched. His voice cracked. "So what then? Diplomat. Should we do nothing? Should we wait until they laugh at us?" Ibrahim stepped closer, his voice lower, steadier. "No. You change the game. You do not play by their rules. You redefine the board. You show the world that you are not murderers, but men who fight for justice with discipline. The cockpit was silent, except for the hum of the engines. Ibrahim let the silence stretch. Let it work. Let them hear the weight of their own breathing. Finally, Youssef lowered his gun. A fraction. You speak well. Too well. Who are you really? I told you, Ibrahim said. A man who knows how crises are handled. Nothing more. Nothing less. He could feel the eyes on him, searching for cracks in his disguise. The pilots stared, hope blooming in their tired faces. The hijackers stared, suspicion crawling in theirs. And yet, something shifted. Youssef no longer looked at Ibrahim as just another hostage. He looked at him as a player across the board. An opponent, or perhaps an advisor. The French negotiator interrupted again. Youssef, we need proof of life. Send us something to show the passengers are unharmed. Ibrahim seized the opening. Yes, do that. It will buy you time. Bring the children forward. Film them. Show they are safe. Paris will hesitate. And hesitation is your ally. Youssef hesitated, then nodded. Yes, that could work. He turned to his men. Prepare the children. The decision was made, not by guns, but by words. Yet even as the moment settled, Ibrahim felt the tension coil again. Words could bend a man's mind. But guns, still raised, could erase those words in a heartbeat. And in that fragile silence, he asked himself the question he had been circling all along. Could words truly outmatch guns? The decision came quickly. Youssef barked the order, and two of the younger hijackers moved into the cabin. Bring the children forward. Now, gasps rippled through the rows. Mothers clutched their little ones tighter, afraid the words meant something darker. It took force, rough hands, harsh commands to separate them from their seats. Children cried, small voices piercing the stale air of the plane. Mothers followed, their arms wrapped around thin shoulders, their eyes wide with terror. Ibrahim stepped into the aisle, hands raised to calm the chaos. Easy, he said to the hijackers. If you want the world to see you are not monsters, then let them come forward gently. No shouting, no pushing. Show discipline. Youssef glared, but he nodded. The others backed off slightly, though their rifles still hovered like shadows over the group. 6 children in total, youngest barely 3, oldest maybe 11, were brought to the front of the cabin. Their mothers clung to them, whispering reassurances that even they did not believe. Ibrahim knelt to the children's level, lowering himself, until his eyes met theirs. His voice softened. Hello, my name is Ibrahim. What are your names? At first, silence. Then, haltingly, one boy whispered, Amadou. A girl, clutching her doll so tightly its arm was bent, said, Mariama. One by one, the others spoke, voice trembling. Ibrahim smiled gently at each. Good. Very good. You are brave. Do you know why you are here? Because the world must see you. They must see that you are alive, that you are strong. We will make a small film, like a message, and when they see you smile, they will know you are safe. Then we will all go home. The children's eyes flickered confusion, fear, then the faintest glimmer of trust. His calmness was contagious. Mariama loosened her grip on the doll. Amadou straightened his back, trying to look older, braver. For a brief second, Ibrahim's own childhood flashed before him. He remembered being their age, barefoot in dusty streets, clutching schoolbooks tighter than food. He remembered soldiers patrolling the markets, their weapons heavier than their stares. He had known fear young. Yet even then, a teacher's voice, a soldier's calm, had given him the strength to endure. He was now that voice for these children. Youssef raised his phone, preparing to film. Ibrahim held up a hand. Wait, not like that. Show the mothers too. Let them hold their children. Let them speak. The world needs to see. This is not cruelty. Youssef hesitated, then nodded. He wanted legitimacy, not slaughter. He handed the phone to Jamal, who began recording. One by one, the children waved shyly at the camera. Their mothers spoke in trembling voices. We are alive. We are not harmed. We are waiting. Ibrahim guided them, whispering encouragement. Smile. Just a little. Show them your courage. The final recording was short, only a minute, but it carried weight heavier than bullets. When Jamal ended the video and sent it through the negotiators channel, the cabin seemed to exhale. Passengers craned their necks to see the children return to their seats, their faces pale but alive. Mothers wept, hugging them as though they had been gone for years. A ripple of relief moved through the rows, a fragile hope born from the sight of survival. But hope is never quiet. It spread like a rumor, a secret passed mouth to mouth. They will let us live. The children smiled. Perhaps it will end well. Even the hijackers felt the shift. Jamal lowered his weapon slightly, as if the weight had grown too heavy. Ahmed frowned, confusion battling the fire in his eyes. Only Hakim kept his rifle steady, but Ibrahim saw his jaw tighten. For a moment, even Youssef allowed his shoulders to drop, as though the act of filming had stolen some of his fury. The old woman beside Ibrahim leaned close. "You are different, my son. When you speak, even the guns listen." He did not answer. His eyes stayed on Youssef, who paced nervously near the cockpit door. The leader's bravado had cracked. He no longer looked like a man commanding destiny, but like a boy unsure of the rules of the game he had started. The radio crackled. The negotiator's voice carried a new tone, measured, cautious. "We have received the video. We acknowledge the hostages are alive. This helps. But Youssef, you must release some people. Children, the elderly. Show good faith." Youssef swore under his breath. "Release them." "No. If we let them go, what leverage do we have left?" Ibrahim leaned forward, his voice low but cutting. "Leverage is not in numbers. Leverage is in perception. By releasing some, you gain trust. Trust is the strongest weapon you have right now." The hijackers muttered among themselves, divided. Ahmed shook his head violently. Jamal wavered. Hakim stared at the floor. For the first time, the group's unity looked fragile, and among the passengers, whispers spread. They dared to imagine survival. They dared to hope. But hope is a dangerous thing. It makes people act, whisper, plan. It changes silence into questions. Questions into risks. And for the first time, hope entered the cabin. But hope can be dangerous. The sky above Mali had turned into a prison of circles. Each loop drained the tanks. Each turn drew the passengers closer to the edge of panic. The engine's roar no longer sounded like power. It sounded like hunger, devouring the last drops of fuel. The captain's voice, shaky but controlled, finally cut through the intercom. "Mesdames et messieurs, we must conserve calm. Fuel levels are critical." His words, meant as reassurance, did the opposite. The cabin rippled with dread. Mothers held children tighter. An old man pressed his face against the window, whispering a final prayer. The French businessmen, who had been whispering plans to sue the airline hours before, now sat pale, hollow, staring straight ahead. Hope had come and gone in waves, and now despair returned, with sharper teeth. The hijackers argued among themselves. Ahmed paced, his rifle tapping against the metal of the seats. Jamal muttered angrily about betrayal. Hakim demanded a landing before the engines died mid-air. Their voices overlapped, a chorus of fear disguised as command. Youssef slammed his fist against the cockpit wall. "We land in Bamako. We take fuel. We release nothing until Paris obeys." Ibrahim stepped forward, his tone even, slicing through the noise. "If you land in Bamako, you will not walk out alive." All eyes turned to him. Some passengers lifted their heads, clinging to his words, as if to a lifeline. Youssef glared, his voice tight. "Why do you say this? Bamako is closer. It is fuel. It is survival." "No," Ibrahim said firmly. "It is a trap. France controls Bamako. They have troops, special forces, waiting for this very moment. The moment your wheels touch the runway, you will be surrounded. Soldiers will storm the cabin. Passengers will be caught in the crossfire. You will die, and your cause will die with you." The words settled like lead. Ahmed shook his head, muttering, "Lies. He is trying to break us." But Hakim frowned, considering. His grip on the weapon loosened, just slightly. "And if he is right," he murmured. The cockpit was silent. But for the low hiss of the radio, the French negotiator's voice crackled again. Youssef, Bamako is ready. Land now. We guarantee safety. Ibrahim let out a short, humorless laugh. Guarante. You know what that means in their language? It means bullets. Youssef's eyes narrowed. Then where? Where do we go? Niger. Ouagadougou. Ibrahim spoke slowly, deliberately. Stay in the air. Demand fuel. But not in Bamako. Niger is less under French control. Or better, return to Burkina Faso. There, you may still have a voice. There, the world will see you as more than pawns. The leader's chest heaved. Sweat dripped down his temple. His men looked at him, doubt creeping into their faces. The authority that had carried him from the start was crumbling under the weight of choices. In the cabin, passengers sensed the fracture. Whispers spread. They are fighting. Maybe we will survive. Maybe not. The old woman beside Ibrahim clutched his sleeve once more. Her lips trembled. My son, are we falling from the sky? Not yet, Ibrahim said quietly. But choices will decide. The negotiator's voice pressed harder. Bamako. It is the only option. Land. Now. Youssef's hand trembled on the radio switch. His eyes darted from Ibrahim to his men, then to the passengers beyond the door. Every option tasted of death. Ibrahim leaned closer, his voice low but cutting. The third rule of negotiation. Youssef, trust is the only currency. Spend it wisely. Choose wrongly, and it vanishes. Youssef stared at him. For a moment, Ibrahim saw the boy beneath the gun. The boy who believed in freedom but had no map for the journey. The boy who wanted to be a hero but feared dying as a fool. Finally, Youssef lowered the radio. Not Bamako. We change course. The cockpit exhaled in unison. Passengers, though they could not hear, felt the shift. Relief whispered through the rows like wind through dry grass. Ibrahim sat back, but his mind did not rest. He had steered them away from slaughter. Yes, he had bent the will of armed men with words, but trust. Trust was fragile, a breath too strong, and it shattered. He had won their trust, but trust is the most fragile currency of all. On the ground, the silence of ignorance was broken. The first flashes came across French news channels. Un avion d'Air France détourné au-dessus du Mali. A hijacked plane. Demands for ransom. A crisis unfolding above the desert skies. In Paris, stern-faced anchors spoke in clipped tones, framing the story as another episode in the war on terror. 4 armed men, identity unclear. 182 hostages. Demands include money and the release of dangerous prisoners. They spoke with authority, but their words carried the same undertone, fear, mixed with arrogance. To them, the story was numbers, not lives. But in Ouagadougou, the story sounded different. Radios crackled in crowded markets. Voices quivered in homes. Mothers clutched their children. Fathers stopped their work. The words carried not just fear, but something deeper: intimacy. This was not a distant crisis. These were their people, their sons, their daughters, their neighbors. At a roadside tea stand, a man shook his head. France will use this. They will storm the plane. They will kill our people to prove their strength. Another replied bitterly. Always the same story. African lives are cheaper than French pride. Across the continent, social media erupted. Hashtags rose in Arabic, French, English, AF. 726. Justice for Africa. Free Audi. Some called the hijackers heroes. Others condemned them as butchers. But all agreed on one thing. The world was watching. And above Mali, in the circling aircraft, the passengers began to understand they were no longer invisible. The hijackers tuned the radio, catching fragments of international broadcasts. A BBC voice spoke through the static. Negotiations are ongoing. Authorities have not confirmed where the plane will land. CNN followed, speculating about the prisoners at Lante, repeating old footage of protests in Mali and Burkina Faso. Some passengers heard the reports and wept louder. Others sat straighter, the knowledge of global eyes giving them fragile courage. One French businessman muttered, "At least they know. At least Paris knows." A Burkina woman spat back, "Paris will save Paris." They will not save us. Ibrahim listened, silent. The words stung, because they were true. France had never saved Africa. It had used it, drained it, spoken of partnership while chaining it in debt and dependence. And now, France saw this plane not as a vessel of lives, but as a stage to prove its authority once more. The old woman beside him tugged at his sleeve. My son, they speak of Mali, of Paris. But who speaks for us? Ibrahim looked at her, his jaw tight. He wanted to say, I do. I will. But his disguise still held him silent. In the cockpit, Youssef turned from the radio, eyes burning. They lie. He spat. They call us terrorists already, even before we act. They condemn us. His voice rose, sharp. If they see us as monsters, then maybe monsters are what we must become. No, Ibrahim said quickly, his voice cutting through the heat. That is exactly what they want. They want you to spill blood so they can erase your cause. You think headlines will call you heroes? No, they will call you killers, and the world will believe them. The younger hijackers shifted uneasily. Jamal bit his lip. Ahmed glanced at the floor. Hakim, the strongest, still gripped his rifle, but said nothing. Doubt seeped into their faces. As steady as fuel slipping from the tanks, Ibrahim felt the pressure growing. He had bent their course once already, had bought time, but time was thin. And with every report broadcast across the world, the stakes grew sharper. In Ouagadougou, crowds gathered in front of television screens, praying aloud. Some wept openly. Others chanted Sankara's name, invoking the spirit of resistance. Children held posters, scrawled with words, "Do not kill us to save them." The city's streets pulsed with fear and defiance, but no one knew the truth, that their own president sat quietly in seat 178, holding the fate of the plane in his hands. And as the news spread further, Ibrahim felt the invisible net closing, because if the world learned that the leader of Burkina Faso was on that plane, the crisis would no longer belong to 4 desperate men with rifles. It would become a battle of nations. But what if the world learned the truth that their president was on board, far below the circling aircraft? Phones buzzed in palaces and embassies. Voices clashed across cables and encrypted lines. The language of crisis spoken not with guns, but with calculations. In Paris, the French interior minister barked orders from a room thick with smoke and tension. We cannot allow this to drag on. They must land in Bamako. Our forces are ready. Screens glowed with satellite images of the plane, flashing red as if it were already guilty. Advisors spoke in hushed voices, some eager for action, others worried about public backlash. One dared to ask, and if there are French citizens among them? The minister waved his hand. Collateral. France cannot bow to terrorists. The word collateral hung in the air like poison. In Bamako, Mali's leaders listened to Paris with clenched jaws. Their president, weakened by years of coups and foreign pressure, muttered, "We are not their colony anymore." But the French ambassador's glare silenced him. French officers were already moving toward the airport, armored trucks rolling under the hot sun. Bamako was less a partner than a pawn, pushed across the board at France's command. Meanwhile, in Ouagadougou, the Burkina Faso cabinet was in chaos. Ministers shouted over one another in the dimly lit chamber. Our people are on that plane. France will storm it, and we will be left to bury the dead. The defense minister slammed his fist, the sound echoing. We must intervene. Take control of negotiations. But without Ibrahim, their voices carried no anchor. It was like a ship without a captain, tossed by waves of fear and fury. And, in Niamey, Niger's leaders faced their own dilemma. French troops still lingered on their soil, unwanted guests who refused to leave. The president whispered to his closest aide, "If we help Paris, we become their dogs. If we refuse, they will punish us. Either way, we bleed." The aide nodded grimly. In politics, survival was often no better than surrender. The calls tangled. A web of orders, threats, and false promises. Paris demanded. Mali obeyed. Niger hesitated. Burkina Faso begged for a voice it no longer had, because the one voice that mattered most was 30,000 feet above. Hidden in plain sight, outside the palaces, the media roared. French channels ran dramatic graphics. An aircraft circling endlessly. Headlines blaring crisis over Africa. Commentators spoke with authority, but little humanity. Négociation continue. Paris must remain firm. Concessions cannot be made to extremists. The word extremists, repeated like a drumbeat, drowning nuance. In Africa, the story sounded different. Radios in dusty markets relayed updates, their crackling voices trembling with emotion. Mothers clutched children. Fathers stopped working. Traders fell silent. A man at a roadside tea stall muttered, "France will use this. They will storm the plane and kill our people to prove their strength." Another spat back. Always the same. African lives are cheaper than French pride. On social media, hashtags multiplied. AF 726. Justice for Africa. Our children in the sky. Posts alternated between prayers, anger, and conspiracy theories. Some called the hijackers heroes. Others condemned them. But all agreed on one thing. The world was watching. Inside the aircraft, fragments of this global storm reached the passengers through the hijackers' radio. A BBC voice reported, "Negotiations are tense. Demands remain unmet. Autorities urge pacienza." CNN speculated about the prisoners at Lante, replaying old footage of protests in Mali. Al Jazeera ran interviews with African youth, many saying, "They may be criminals, but they speak our pain." The passengers reacted in waves. Some wept louder, convinced the broadcasts meant doom. Others straightened in their seats, realizing they were no longer invisible. Their suffering was now global spectacle. One French businessman whispered, "At least Paris knows." A Burkina woman hissed, "Paris will save Paris, not us." Ibrahim listened in silence. Each word from the radio was another reminder that this was no longer just a hijacking. It was a stage where France and Africa performed their oldest packet, bitteris quarrel. The passengers were props, the hijackers, unwilling actors, and he hidden still was both player and judge. The old woman beside him tugged his sleeve. "My son, they speak of France, of Mali, of Niger, but who speaks for us?" Her words cut through the noise. Ibrahim felt them like a knife. He wanted to answer, "I do. I am here." But his disguise was still his shield. For now, he remained silent. In the cockpit, Youssef's anger boiled. "They lie," he spat, turning from the radio. "They call us terrorists already. Even before we act, they condemn us." His voice cracked, teetering on despair. "If they see us as monsters, then perhaps monsters are what we must become." "No," Ibrahim said sharply, his voice slicing through the heat. "That is exactly their plan. They push you toward blood, so they can erase your cause. Once you kill, the story is theirs. They will call you butchers, and the world will believe them." The younger hijackers shifted uneasily. Jamal bit his lip. Ahmed glanced at the floor. Hakim, silent as ever. He adjusted his rifle, but said nothing. Cracks spread in their unity. Hairline fractures ready to break. The negotiator's voice returned, colder than before. "This is your last chance. Youssef, land in Bamako. Refuse, and consequences will follow." Youssef slammed the radio down, his chest heaving. Ahmed cursed. Jamal muttered a prayer. The cabin fell into uneasy silence. Ibrahim sat still, his mind racing. The plane was trapped in the sky, but the real battle was already raging on the ground in offices, in embassies, in newsrooms. A war of words and wills. Where Africa's dignity was once again the stake, the plane was in the air. But the real battle was on the ground. The cabin had grown quieter, but not calmer. It was the silence of exhaustion, the stillness of people who had cried too long, prayed too hard, and now clung to silence like their last shield. Children dozed on mothers' laps, their small bodies trembling with each shudder of the aircraft. The air smelled of sweat, fear, and recycled oxygen. Then the radio crackled again, the negotiator's voice, steady but edged with something sharper, filled the cockpit. "Youssef, we are aware of intelligence, that a high-value individual may be among the passengers. We advise caution. Any harm to this individual will carry grave consequences." The words spread like fire. Even before Youssef slammed the radio off, whispers had begun in the cabin. A high-value individual. Some passengers looked around, their eyes darting across rows of weary faces. A French businessman muttered, "Perhaps an ambassador. Or military." A Burkina woman whispered back, "Then why hide? Why not reveal?" The rumor moved like smoke, slipping under every seat. Eyes turned to strangers they had sat beside for hours. Fear makes suspicion easy, and suspicion was dangerous. Ibrahim felt it immediately. The weight of glances, the unease of those who had begun to notice him, the man in simple clothes, who somehow spoke with calm when others screamed, who walked into the cockpit and returned unharmed. He had been invisible, and now invisibility cracked. The old woman beside him clutched his arm tighter. Her voice shook. "Is it you? My son. Are you the one they speak of?" He met her gaze, eyes soft. "I am just a traveler," he whispered. But her look told him she did not believe it fully. Maybe she didn't need to. Maybe she only needed hope. In the cockpit, Youssef's face betrayed unease. Who is this? High-value passenger. His eyes flicked toward Ibrahim, standing calm near the door. Suspicion, faint but growing, flickered in his stare. Ibrahim met the look. Steady, unblinking. He knew that if Youssef pressed too hard, the fragile trust he had built could shatter. And if it shattered, the rifles would speak, instead of words. The hijackers muttered among themselves. Ahmed was restless. What if Paris speaks truth? What if one of them is more than they seem? Jamal whispered. Then he is leverage. More than money. More than prisoners. The words hung like knives. Leverage. It was the only language men with guns trusted. Ibrahim's thoughts churned. He had managed so far by staying hidden, by being both everywhere and nowhere. But now the walls were closing in. If the passengers suspected, if the hijackers confirmed, his mask would be torn away. And once gone, there would be no going back. He remembered the first rule of survival in chaos. Reveal only what strengthens you, never what weakens you. The question was whether his identity would save lives or end them faster. Back in the cabin, passengers whispered louder. He spoke like a diplomat. He calmed the hijackers. He must be someone. The rumor coiled tighter, feeding on fear. The old woman touched his hand again. Her eyes, tired but sharp, studied his face. Whoever you are, you carry yourself like a man who has carried many burdens. If the time comes, speak. Do not hide. Her words struck deep. For years, Ibrahim had told himself that leadership meant blending with the people, being one of them. But here, inside this steel coffin in the sky, blending might no longer be enough. In the cockpit, Youssef turned back to him. His voice was sharp. His suspicion unveiled. You speak too calmly. You know too much. Who are you? Really? The question rang like a blade against stone. Ibrahim did not answer. Not yet. His silence was his shield, but he could feel the moment approaching, heavy as the desert air. For hours he had played the diplomat, the negotiator, the anonymous traveler, but masks, no matter how carefully worn, do not last forever, and sooner or later, the mask would have to fall. The fuel gauges dipped lower, with every passing minute. Each circle above the desert shortened, each turn sharper, more disparate. The pilots exchanged glances, their faces pale under the dim cockpit lights. They knew. One more loop, maybe two, and the tanks would run dry. At last, the captain's strained voice crackled over the intercom. Mesdames et messieurs, we are preparing to land. Please remain seated. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they fell like stones into still water, sending ripples of fear through the cabin. Mothers pressed children to their chests, whispering prayers. The French businessmen who had once complained about delays now sat stiff, eyes fixed on the seat in front of them, lips moving soundlessly. An elderly man stroked his prayer beads with trembling fingers, as though the beads themselves could hold the plane aloft. The hijackers prowled the aisles, to rifles, twitching with every jolt of turbulence. Ahmed hissed. It is a trap. Bamako is waiting with soldiers. Jamal snapped back. We cannot stay in the air. Would you rather fall like birds shot from the sky? Even Hakim, usually stone-faced, muttered under his breath, sweat rolling down his temple. Youssef was caught in the middle, his chest rising and falling like a man drowning. He turned toward Ibrahim, eyes sharp with suspicion. We land. But if this is betrayal, if soldiers wait, blood will flow. Ibrahim met his gaze steadily. Then do not spill it. Discipline is stronger than fear. If you show control, you still hold power. If you panic, you lose everything. The words struck something in Youssef. His hand trembled on the rifle, but he nodded. The descent began. The engines growled, forcing the plane downward. The cabin tilted, and passengers clutched armrests, seatbelts biting into their waists. From the small windows, the world below grew clearer lines of tarmac, patches of sand, faint glints of metal. Gasps rippled through the rows. There, look, trucks. A mother pressed her child's head against her shoulder, shielding his eyes. Aman muttered, soldiers. I see them outside. The runway stretched like a wound across the earth. On its edges, dark shapes waited. Vehicles, figures, unmoving silhouettes. Too orderly, too still. To the passengers, they were salvation. To the hijackers, they were wolves. The whispers divided the cabin. We are saved. No, this is the end. They will storm the plane. Hope and despair clashed in the same breath, feeding off each other until the air itself felt heavy. Ibrahim sat motionless. Though his heart beat hard against his ribs, he knew the truth. Both sides were right. Salvation or slaughter, and the line between them was as thin as the wings slicing through the air. Beside him, the old woman clutched his sleeve. Tell me, my son, she whispered, voice breaking, will we live to see the sun again? He turned to her, steady, his voice calm enough to anchor a storm. Yes, mother, hold on to that. The plane jolted as the wheels slammed against the tarmac. A scream tore through the cabin, followed by another, then a chorus, fear and relief mingling in the same breath. Metal screeched. Brakes howled. The entire fuselage shuddered. Then, with a groan, the aircraft slowed. It rolled forward, rattling, until finally it came to a halt. Silence fell. Heavy, suffocating silence. Through the windows, passengers strained to see. Shadows moved in the distance, trucks repositioning. Dark figures spreading along the perimeter. Were they soldiers preparing to storm? Or negotiators waiting for orders? The not knowing was worse than either. In the cockpit, Youssef's hand hovered over his rifle, knuckles white. If they rush us, he muttered, we take hostages to the door. We fight. We die with noise, not silence. Ibrahim leaned closer, his words cutting sharp. That is what they want. For you to die as beasts, not men. You must not give them that ending. Remember what I told you. Violence is their script. Refuse to play it. Write your own. Youssef's breath came ragged, torn between defiance and doubt. His men muttered. Their unity cracked. Ahmed cursed under his breath. Jamal prayed aloud. Hakim stayed silent, staring at the floor, his silence louder than words. The passengers, though they could not hear, felt the tension thicken. Some gripped the hands of strangers. Others whispered their names, as if to leave a last trace of themselves in the air. Children whimpered, too young to understand, but old enough to feel terror. The engines wound down with a final groan. The cabin vibrated once, then stilled. The plane had landed, but no one moved. Not the passengers, not the hijackers, not even the soldiers outside. The entire world seemed to hold its breath. The plane had landed, but the real question was, who would step out alive? The engines had gone quiet, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than their roar. The aircraft rested on the runway like a wounded beast, its metal shell trembling from the long descent. For the first time since the hijacking began, the passengers were not moving through the sky. But the stillness was no comfort. It was worse, because now they were surrounded. Inside, fear spread like smoke. Mothers clutched children against their chests, rocking them in whispered lullabies that could not quiet their trembling. An elderly Frenchman pressed his palm flat against the window, whispering Ave Maria under his breath. Across the aisle, a Burkina farmer closed his eyes and murmured the names of his ancestors, calling on spirits older than any flag. The cabin became a chorus of prayers, whispered in French, Arabic, Mooré, Bambara, different tongues, pleading for the same mercy. The hijackers were restless shadows. Ahmed stalked the aisle, his rifle twitching at every sound. His eyes darted wildly, as though expecting soldiers to burst through the doors at any moment. Jamal paced near the galley, muttering curses and fragments of prayers. Torn between rage and dread, Hakim leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, his silence thicker than words. Only Youssef stood still, near the cockpit, his jaw clenched, sweat dripping down his temple. He looked less like a commander than a man balancing on the edge of collapse. Through the narrow windows, the passengers could see faint lights on the tarmac. Trucks, dark silhouettes of men crouched low, waiting. The vehicles formed a crescent around the plane, headlights switched off, engines idling like predators in the dark. Soldiers, perhaps, negotiators, perhaps, but they did not move. They were the storm on the horizon, holding its breath. The waiting was the hardest. Every second of silence felt like the second before thunder. People flinched at the smallest noises. A baby's cry, the click of a seatbelt, the rattle of the ventilation system. Fear sharpened every sound into a threat. A child whimpered, his small body shaking against his mother's chest. She rocked him harder, whispering, "Shh, shh, my love, just a little longer." But the child's sobs grew louder, piercing the silence like glass breaking. Ahmed snapped his head toward them, rifle rising. "Quiet that child," he barked, voice cracking with nerves more than anger. The mother froze, tears spilling down her cheeks. She covered her son's mouth, but the muffled sobs continued. Panic rippled through the rows. A gun could fire for nothing more than a cry. Ibrahim stood slowly, his presence filling the aisle without force. His voice was calm, steady, cutting through the terror. "He is only a child. Ahmed, fear makes him cry. Would you kill a child for fear?" The hijacker's hands shook on the weapon, his lips curled, but no words came. For a moment, the cabin teetered on the edge of disaster. Then Ahmed spat to the side and lowered the rifle. "Control your child," he muttered. Stalking away, the mother collapsed in relief, kissing her boy's head, rocking him with trembling arms. The cabin exhaled as one, but the relief was fragile. Everyone knew it could break again in a heartbeat. Youssef's eyes burned into Ibrahim, suspicion sharper than ever. "You," he said, voice low but dangerous. "Always calm, always speaking as though you command. Who are you to tell us what to do?" Ibrahim held his gaze. "I am someone who has seen what happens when men confuse fear for strength. Someone who knows how quickly pride can destroy everything." The leader's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. His silence was more dangerous than words. Outside, the runway remained a stage, lit faintly by floodlights. Vehicles crouched at the edges, their stillness more threatening than movement. Negotiators whispered into radios. Soldiers gripped their weapons. The plane was a theater, and every soul inside a character, waiting for the first act of violence. The passengers felt it too. A French woman whispered to her husband, "If they storm, we run." He shook his head, eyes hollow. There is nowhere to run. A Burkina youth clenched his fists, whispering, "Better to die standing than waiting like cattle." His neighbor gripped his arm, begging, "Do not speak. Do not make them hear you." Hope and despair battled inside the fuselage. Some prayed for soldiers to come. Others prayed the soldiers would stay away. Ibrahim sat again, his hands clasped loosely, his eyes never leaving. Youssef. He knew this silence. He had felt it on battlefields, in council rooms before coups, in negotiations where bullets waited just outside the walls. It was not peace. It was the pause before chaos. The old woman beside him leaned closer, her voice a cracked whisper. "My son, why do they wait?" He answered softly, "Because the first bullet decides everything, and no one wants to fire it first." She closed her eyes, clutching her rosary tighter. His words did not erase her fear, but they gave her something rarer clarity. Minutes stretched like hours. The silence was suffocating, crushing the air from every chest. Even the hijackers felt it. Their eyes darted, their hands slick with sweat. Ibrahim breathed slowly, steadying himself. He knew the truth. Silence was not safety. Silence was the mass chaos war before it struck. And in that silence, everyone knew the storm was coming. The silence shattered. It began with something small, so small it could have been nothing. A passenger in row 20 shifted, fumbling nervously with his seatbelt. The metallic click echoed far louder than it should have, slicing through the fragile, quiet. Ahmed spun instantly. Rifle, snapping up. Sit down. He barked. His voice cracked, as if it too was fraying under the weight of fear. The man froze, hands trembling in the air. I only needed to stretch. But before he could finish, the night outside erupted in blinding light. Floodlights ignited from every direction, piercing through the cabin windows. White beams slashed across faces, erasing shadows, stripping everyone bare. Passengers screamed, covering their eyes, shielding their children. The hijackers shouted in confusion, their nerves unraveling. "They are coming," Jamal cried, pressing his face to the cockpit glass. "Zoldiers, they are moving closer." Outside, engines rumbled like distant thunder. The trucks on the runway shifted formation, edging forward in a slow, deliberate march. Behind them, dark figures spread along the perimeter. Soldiers crouched low, rifle ready. The storm that had been waiting finally began to move. Inside the fuselage, panic ignited. A mother clutched her baby so tightly, the child wailed louder. Two French businessmen argued in frantic whispers. "They will save us now. Save us. They'll shoot us with them inside." A Burkina farmer shouted a prayer, his voice loud. "Desperate." The hijackers spun in circles, weapons raised. Ahmed's rifle swung wildly across the rows of terrified passengers. Jamal's breathing came in ragged gasps, muttering, "We are dead. We are already dead." Hakim stayed rigid at the rear, jaw clenched. But even his hands trembled on the gun. Youssef stood frozen, his chest heaving, sweat glistening under the white glare. He looked less like a leader than a man drowning in his own choices. And then Ahmed screamed, his voice breaking, "If they storm us, we kill them all. Every last one." His finger hovered over the trigger, trembling. That was when Ibrahim stood. He rose with deliberate calm, his shadow long under the blinding lights. His voice thundered above the chaos, sharp as a blade. "Stop." The word cut the cabin in half. For a moment, even the sobbing of children faltered. All eyes turned to him, passengers clinging to hope, hijackers drowning in fear. And Youssef, caught between pride and collapse. Ibrahim stepped into the aisle, unflinching though. 3 rifles pointed at his chest. His voice rang steady, each syllable a command. This is exactly what they want. For you to lose control, for fear to rule you. Fire 1 bullet, and they will storm this plane. No one will live. Not you, not them, not us. Jamal shook his head wildly. And what then? Do we wait here to be slaughtered like goats? "You hold," Ibrahim said, his voice low, anchored. "You keep discipline. You prove you are still men, not beasts. If you spill blood, you're caused these tonight." The words struck deeper than gunfire. The hijackers faltered, eyes darting. Even Ahmed's finger slipped slightly from the trigger. But outside, the storm pressed closer. The rumble of engines grew louder. Boots crunched against asphalt. The floodlights swelled brighter, burning through the cabin like knives of light. Soldiers moved in shadow, their silhouettes crawling nearer. Inside, the passengers broke into whispers. Frantic, fractured. A French woman clung to her husband, crying, "We are saved." He shook his head, his lips white. "Saved. They will shoot through us." A Burkinab youth clenched his fists, whispering, "Better to die standing than waiting." His neighbor grabbed his arm. "Quiet. Do not make them hear you." Hope and despair warred inside the fuselage. Neither strong enough to win. The old woman beside Ibrahim pressed her rosary so hard the beads cut her palms. Her whisper trembled. "My son, they will kill us." Ibrahim placed his hand gently over hers. "Not if we choose differently." The tension snapped tighter as 3 rifles rose again. Ahmed shouted, They are storming. Shoot before they breach. Yamal joined, his voice shrill. We cannot wait. Even Hakim lifted his gun. Silent, but ready. Youssef stood in the center, torn apart, eyes wild. His men looked to him, waiting for the order kill or surrender. His lips trembled, the weight of destiny crushing his chest. And then came the sound, 3 rifles being cocked in unison. Parsenniers shrieked, some ducking under seats, others clinging to strangers as though flesh could shield bullets. Ibrahim's voice exploded above it all. Enough. With one motion, he tore the cap from his head and ripped the sunglasses from his face. His eyes, sharp as steel, met Youssef's. His voice carried not just authority, but inevitability. Because I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso, and I am telling you no one fires a bullet tonight. The cabin gasped as passengers froze, mouths open in disbelief. Hijackers staggered back, their faces cracked with shock. And outside, the floodlights blazed brighter still, as though the whole world was staring through the windows. In that blinding light, the world would finally see who he truly was. For a heartbeat, the cabin froze. The words still hung in the air like smoke. President of Burkina Faso. Passengers stared at the man who had sat quietly among them for hours. A few whispered in disbelief. Others wept openly, overcome by shock. It cannot be. It is him. I have seen his face on the news. A French woman clutched her chest, whispering, Mon Dieu. The hijackers were struck silent. Ahmed's mouth twisted, his finger still trembling on the trigger. Jamal staggered back, as though the truth itself had struck him. Hakim's eyes flickered, unreadable, his weapon still raised but his grip faltering. And Youssef stared with the eyes of a man who had just realized the ground beneath him was gone. You lie. Ahmed spat, his voice breaking. You think saying that name saves you? No. It makes you our prize. Our golden hostage. He jerked his rifle toward Ibrahim, his teeth bared. With you, we can demand anything. The passengers gasped. Some began to sob, covering their faces, as though hiding might make them vanish from the horror. But Ibrahim did not flinch. His gaze was steady, his voice calm. If you harm me, you sign your own death warrant. Look outside. Soldiers wait. The world waits. One shot, and they will not come to negotiate. They will come to kill. And you will be remembered not as freedom fighters, not as men of principle, but as murderers of children and butchers of the innocent. Ahmed's breath came fast, uneven. His rifle shook. Better to die fighting than rot in chains. Jamal stepped forward, his voice shaking. But if he is truly who he says, then killing him means death for us all. France will never forgive. Burkina will never forgive. No one will forgive. Hakim spoke at last, his tone low, measured. Maybe surrender buys us time. Maybe prison is better than the grave. All eyes turned to Youssef. His face was drenched in sweat, his chest heaving like a man dragged underwater. He looked at Ibrahim, then at his men, then at the passengers whose lives dangled on the edge of his decision. You said no blood, he muttered, his voice hoarse. You said there is another way. There is. Ibrahim answered, you lay down your arms. You step off this plane alive. You show the world you had a cause, but not a thirst for slaughter. Then you speak again, not with guns, but with words. Silence followed, heavy, suffocating. Ahmed's finger tightened, his rage boiling. No, they will bury us alive. They will drag us in chains. Do not listen. But Jamal spoke over him, desperation raw in his voice. And if we fight, we hear. You saw the lights. You heard the engines. They are waiting. They are ready. We have already lost. The tension stretched, every second an eternity. Passengers clung to each other, afraid even to breathe. Finally, Youssef's rifle lowered, slowly, heavily, like a burden too great to hold. His voice cracked as he gave the order, drop your weapons. Ahmed exploded. No, you covered. You traitor. He swung toward Youssef, his rifle half raised. But Hakim moved first, grabbing Ahmed's arm, forcing the barrel down. Enough. Jamal tossed his gun aside, his body trembling with relief and defeat. Hakim followed, placing his weapon gently on the floor. Ahmed fought, cursed, but at last the rifle slipped from his grasp and clattered against the metal. The passengers erupted into sobs, some from joy, others from sheer exhaustion. Mothers kissed their children. Men buried their faces in their hands. For the first time, hope tasted real, though still bitter on their tongues. Ibrahim stood tall, his eyes never leaving Yusuf. You have made the only choice that leaves you alive. Remember this moment. Courage is not in killing. It is in knowing when to stop. Yusuf's lips trembled, his face twisted with shame and fury. He lowered his head, unable to meet Ibrahim's eyes. We surrender. Outside, soldiers shifted. Radios crackled. The floodlights burned on. Waiting. Inside, the hijackers stood unarmed, their faces hollow. The passengers exhaled as one, the sound of survival filling the air. But surrender never feels like peace. It feels like waiting for the sentence to fall. The doors opened at last. Cold night air swept into the cabin, carrying with it the metallic scent of fuel and the tense breath of soldiers waiting outside. Floodlights poured across the tarmac, turning every movement into theater. The first to step forward were the hijackers, their rifles gone, their shoulders bent, their faces pale. Soldiers surged toward them, hands grabbing, shackles snapping into place. Ahmed cursed until a fist silenced him. Jamal wept quietly, his lips moving in prayer. Hakim walked stiffly, like a man who had already accepted the weight of chains. And Yusuf paused at the threshold, his head bowed, eyes refusing to meet T. The passengers watched in silence. Some glared with hatred, others with pity, for all the terror. Then Ibrahim rose. He removed his cap fully now, letting the floodlights strike his face. Gasps filled the cabin once more. Even those who had doubted could no longer deny it. The man who had sat among them, who had calmed their fear, who had stood against rifles, was their president. As he stepped down the stairway, soldiers rushed forward, only to halt when he raised a hand. His voice carried, firm and calm. These men surrender under my word. They will not be harmed. The commander of the forces saluted, stunned. Monsieur le Président, you were on board. Yes, Ibrahim replied, his tone steady. Among my people, where a leader should be. The passengers began to disembark, stumbling down the stairs into the arms of safety. Some wept as their feet touched solid ground. Mothers clutched children who still cried softly. A French businessman stopped before Ibrahim, eyes wet, whispering, "Mercy." A Burkina farmer grasped his hand, trembling. "You sat with us. You prayed with us. You are one of us." For every word of gratitude, Ibrahim bowed his head humbly. He knew it was not heroism that had saved them, but choice fragile, dangerous choice, held together by patience and restraint. Hours later, at the presidential palace, the press gathered in a frenzy. Cameras flashed, microphones thrust forward. Voix clamorte. The world demanded answers. Ibrahim stood before them, his posture unshaken though exhaustion lined his face. His words were measured, deliberate. Tonight, we faced fear. We saw how easy it is to reach for violence, and how hard it is to hold to peace. These men tried to defend a cause, but chose the wrong path. Yet in the end, dialogue prevailed. Not bullets, not blood. Dialogue. A reporter called out, "Why did you not reveal yourself sooner? Did you not risk your own life?" He answered plainly, "If I had revealed myself too soon, I would have endangered everyone. My duty is not to protect my title, but to protect lives. That is what leadership means." Another asked, "What lesson will you take from this?" Ibrahim's eyes swept the room, his voice firm. That true power is not in palaces or armies. It lies in the hearts of the people. A leader who forgets this is no leader at all. He paused, then added, his tone softening, "And Africa must remember, the enemy is not always the man with the gun. Sometimes it is the silence that lets injustice live." The press fell quiet, his words sinking deeper than headlines could carry. Outside the palace, crowds had gathered. They chanted his name, waved flags, sang songs of relief and pride. Some cried simply because they had lived to see dawn. Others cried because for once they felt their leader had truly walked among them. As Ibrahim stepped onto the balcony, the roar rose like thunder. He lifted his hand, not in triumph, but in acknowledgement. His eyes scanned the faces, old and young, weary and hopeful, and he thought of the old woman's words on the plain. Who speaks for us? He knew the answer now. He must. Always. The night that began in terror ended in a fragile kind of hope, but hope is not victory. It is only the beginning. And as the chants echoed into the dark, one question remained. Lingering over Africa's skis, who will carry this courage forward when the storm comes again?